Shalom, good morning from Jerusalem, Israel. This is Mr. Lowell Joseph Gallen, founder of the Root and Branch Association Limited, established in the United States of God of Israel, bless America, in New York State in 1981, now celebrating our 43rd year. Today is Thursday, June 27, 2024 in the Gregorian calendar. And in the Hebrew Israelite calendar, it is the 21st day of the third Israelite Hebrew month of Sivan, year 5784. Welcome to episode 73 of our monthly Root and Branch Association Limited Erev Rav and Amalek Research Fellowship Seminars. The chairman of the fellowship and the monthly seminar is Rabbi Hananiah Weitzman of Jerusalem, Israel. We are very happy. Hananiah has our most distinguished guest, Dr. Pamela Wible, medical doctor of Eugene, Oregon, is speaking on the issue of doctors and suicides. So, the rainmaking. Please support all of our work. There'll be the links below. And now, without further ado, let me hand over the mic to Rabbi Weitzman and Dr. Wible. Ladies first. Pamela and Hananiah, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Lowell. Welcome to the program, Dr. Wible. I appreciate you burning the midnight oil literally to join us today. I found out about you because I heard about a very shocking story recently. I always give credit to my sources. I'm on Bracha Weisberger's email list. She has a Substack with many thousands of followers. She's been doing great work in exposing what's going on in the medical world and beyond today. And she shared an article from Frontline News about Dr. Jacob Neufeld, who I had not heard of, who seems to have been a very, very special man, a children's doctor who cared very deeply about his patients. And the story was so horrific and shocking, and it takes a lot to shock me today, that I needed to look into it further. And I stumbled upon your website. You've taken up his cause, and I see that his story is not an isolated one, unfortunately, but it's a widespread problem of good doctors. And there are good doctors out there today that are very dedicated to their patients, very dedicated to doing things properly, who are literally being driven to take their own lives. So can you please first start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, how you've gotten into the field of studying doctors and suicide, and then we'll talk more about the story of Dr. J.
I am a family physician and suicidologist now as a result of 12 years immersed in this topic. Both of my parents are physicians. I'm Jewish, by the way. I grew up in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And so I really adhere to the non-censorship model of communication and freedom of speech, and also informed consent. So I really notice when I'm 56 years old, so I've had more than half a century watching the medical profession devolve, having gone to work with my parents as a child and seeing how we have now turned this into sort of a assembly line operation that's lacking true informed consent and freedom of speech. And what that does is it takes these humanitarian idealists. I don't know if you've ever met a pre-med student. They're really like excited. They're ready to save the world. Their eyes are just bright and glowing. And then what do you know? A few years later, they look dead. You can't see any soul inside of them. They've been sort of usurped by this our way or the highway medical hierarchy. And if they don't submit to what their hospital or medical organization wants them to do, they get in the way of the money flow. They will be dealt with accordingly. There's a lot of ways to character assassinate physicians. And so I have just been watching. How did I get into this? I was suicidal myself as sort of almost like a victim of this. When I was in a job that just wanted me to produce numbers and revenue, and they didn't really care about quality. And also I started to witness many of my colleagues dying by suicide. And for whatever reason, I seemed to be the only one that wanted to research why. Everyone else just kind of turned their heads and tried to pretend like these were isolated incidents. And I'm like, there were 3 in my small town in Oregon within a year. And that means 10,000 plus patients in my town don't have a doctor when all these doctors start dying. And I, couldn't get the newspaper. This is back in 2012 to report on it. I couldn't get the TV station to report on it. And so I guess I appointed myself to start reporting on something that nobody seemed to want to talk about. And I'm a real fan of researching taboo topics that are being censored, especially as it relates to mental health. And, you know, I took an oath to do no harm. I took an oath to end human suffering as much as I can. So I considered it my job to actually research why my colleagues were dying. So hopefully that gives you some sense of my determination and position on this.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So I want to talk a little bit more about the case of Dr. J. You've written a long article about it. The Frontline News also had a lot of details about the story, and they portray him as really a hero who cared so deeply about the children that he was taking care of, and he was a specialist in his field. The problem was that he had such a massive workload that he was literally breaking under the pressure of caring for all of these people, giving them the time that they needed, also balancing his personal family life. And he took a job where he was promised that there would be other doctors as well sharing the responsibilities. The hospital seemed to have reneged on this promise. And when he blew the whistle on them, or at least was threatening to do so, they essentially drove him to kill himself. Can you tell us a little bit more about how all this happened? And then we'll start dealing with some of the details.
Well, I think there is a backstory that's actually published in a book on moral injury. It's called If I Betray These Words, that goes into the more financial situation that hospital tried to buy out a bunch of the other clinics in town and kind of put the other hospital at a disadvantage. And they lost, I believe, an antitrust case. They were like $25 million in the hole. And they decided to just extract this as much as possible out of these very good doctors working for them. So they were forcing Neufeld to see like 3 severely, he deals with severely injured children, you know, wheelchair bound, you know, bullet wounds to the spine, cerebral palsy. And, you know, they were trying to get him to see 3 patients per hour. I mean, can you imagine trying to treat these families and the children who are severely injured, you know, 3 per hour? He couldn't do it. He was doing house calls. He was trying to really keep up with the ethics and integrity that he had. And as a result, with no help from any other doctors, because a lot of them just fled the system. You know, when things get tough, a lot of doctors just flee. He's not that type of guy. He stayed. Well, he stayed in a very understaffed situation. He continued to try to work with integrity. And as a result, he wore himself out because they breached his contract. And when he brought this up to them over the years, like, please bring in more staff, please help us. Instead of helping him, they retaliated against him and character assassinated him and sent him, I think this is the crux of the matter, to a physician health program. And it sounds lovely to go to a physician health program, except they're really disciplinary and punishment, kind of like getting sent to the gulag, right? And they sent him like more than 2,000 miles away for a psychiatric evaluation, AKA character assassination, that he did not quite understand until he was there. And that, of course, drove him over the edge. So.
One of the lines that really stood out to me in the article that you wrote was he was being psychologically groomed to accept the unacceptable. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, these physician health programs were originally started as many organizations with a beneficent, you know, purpose, right? These were originally for doctors who are in recovery for substance abuse, being helped by other doctors in recovery for substance abuse. But then they found, wow, we could really make a lot of money because these people really want their licensure, and we're protected by the state because the state boards need a place to send addicted doctors or doctors that are considered bad doctors. But the problem is, I just want to point out, the hospitals will protect the doctors that are increasing the money flow that might be truly bad doctors doing unnecessary surgery, but increasing the money flow, while they harass the doctors that have high integrity that might be doing things that decrease the money flow, right? So basically, doctors who put people over profit are at a disadvantage, and the doctors who put profit over people are protected. And so this is a nice, convenient sort of like trash can where you can send these quote unquote bad doctors that are like not holding the party line, right? Not doing what, and so I hope I'm answering your question. You get sent to a place where essentially you get polygraphed. Sometimes they're wanting to shave your pubic hair, if you can believe that, and check for drugs. I mean, you wouldn't believe what they do in these places. Very demeaning. And you're like in a twilight zone. You can't even explain to other people what's happening. Do you know that Jacob Neufeld's family did not really even understand. He died 7 years ago. His family didn't really understand what happened to him until I wrote this piece. It's so like unbelievable that even your own family members don't understand what's happening up to your death and after your suicide. And he was certainly driven to suicide.
Right. See, that's one of the things that really struck me as I'm reading the story is when they talk about they're going to send him to this psychiatric ward. Like, I want to scream, no, no, don't go. But from the outside looking in, after certainly in hindsight, it all seems obvious what was happening to him. But in the moment, as he's going through this slowly, step by step, I guess every step kind of seemed logical. Or even if it wasn't entirely logical, it was close enough that he felt, maybe if I just take this next step, all these problems will go away. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. It's psychological grooming. It's like you would groom anyone to end up in a criminal sort of outfit. It sounds like, because, it's kind of like a date rape drug, like just have a little bit of this and then you wake up unconscious and naked somewhere and you're like, how did I end up here, right? So these people repeat over and over again, just sign here, we'll get you back to work, we'll advocate for you. And so they sort of, in a way, like sweet talk seduce you into this thing. And by the time you sign, which is very early on, there's no way out. Once you sign that you're going to enroll with them, you're in and you can't get out.
If I were to imagine a medical system run by actual Nazis, or at least people who follow very closely in their footsteps, it would strongly resemble something like this, where you have these nice, Germans saying, please go into this ghetto. You'll be much safer there. Go onto the train. We're taking you to a safe place. Go take the shower from the train. We'll get you all cleaned up. Like, everything seems nice. Maybe in the back of your mind, it's a little bit disturbing, but it's somewhat logical, and you want to believe that they're looking out for your best interests, and really they're marching you to your own death.
Correct. That's correct. There, and I'll just give you a quote from one gentleman who died by suicide under this situation in physician health programs. He said, "I didn't kill myself. They killed me. I just finished the job."
And that's actually the perfect crime. This is the perfect murder, because it doesn't, correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't seem from my standpoint that there's any legal recourse, because they can all say we're following the procedure. We saw warning signs. We were looking out for his health and the health of his patients, right? And in the end, he's the one who did the act of taking his own life ultimately. So it seems like it's the perfect crime, although it was highly planned and coordinated.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone that plays any minor role in this, they're just like in cubicles handing him to the next person, just like with the trains. I just keep the trains running. It's not my fault that they are at the gas chamber, right? And so everyone's just doing their little paid bureaucratic job. This is really bureaucrats practicing medicine without a license. This is really like war crimes, like this is a war on the soul of physicians, especially in the United States, but these programs also exist in Canada and some other places. But every country has their own way of dealing with dissident doctors that stand up for patient safety.
And also, I'm reading the articles. It seems that part of what made Dr. J vulnerable to this was that he himself was a very sweet and trusting person. I got the impression he was like a child himself. Like, he was obviously an expert in his field, but he had this childlike quality of innocence and trust that made him connect well with children, but it didn't help him when he was dealing with monsters. So he was sort of trusting that just because he had a good soul and he cared about the patients, he just naturally assumed that everybody else around him was the same, and they were not.
Exactly. I sometimes talk about what it feels like for a physician in this position. It's kind of like playing chess with criminals. You've got on one side the humanitarian idealist, physician like Jay Neufeld. And on the other side, you have lawyered up hospitals, medical institutions, and administrators that have a whole row of lawyers on their side of the chessboard. And, lawyers have to think like criminals. That's their job. Because they have to have a criminal mind to be a good lawyer, right? But doctors have to think like humanitarians and have an open heart and soul and high ethics to do their job. So just imagine a doctor playing chess with criminals, and you don't get the handbook on how to play chess ahead of time, and look who you're playing against. Who do you think's set up to win?
Right. Dr. J did consult with a lawyer at one point in the process. Did he receive, to your knowledge, any guidance in how to navigate what was happening? This a lawyer on some kind of a retainer, or did he just question him one time and then he tried to figure out everything on his own? Like, what was going on there?
I don't know exactly all the details, but I do believe that he called his lawyer when he was ambushed in a meeting where they were going to give him a contract with a 30% pay cut and like perpetual call, meaning you're on call 24/7 every second of the day for all disabled children in the state of Idaho, because he was like the only pediatric physiatrist in the whole state. And Idaho is the state with the greatest degree of physician shortage in the whole United States. So he really had a lot of kids to take care of, and they were going to give him a pay cut. You know, they were basically trying to force him out, put it that way. But because his integrity is so high for these children, imagine from his perspective, if he left the state of Idaho and allowed them to push him out, that's thousands of children that would get no care and possibly die. And he couldn't live with himself knowing that he would be basically abandoning these children to have no doctor that could take care of him. So basically he was ambushed in this meeting. He didn't understand that he was going to walk into this room and have all these administrators there that basically said, you've got one choice. You either sign this contract or we're sending you to a psychiatrist to have a evaluation for impairment, even though we've caused it by giving you unsustainable working conditions, right?
So the mafia essentially gave him an offer that he couldn't refuse: either get a pay cut and be worked to the bone, literally be worked to death and driven crazy, or abandon the children. Those were the choices that he was offered.
And to answer your question about the attorney, he did call his attorney once he realized he was being ambushed. And his attorney, I understand, answered the phone, I believe, and he left it on in his pocket. I don't have a recording of that. I don't know what happened, but I mean, he was savvy enough over the years to get an attorney. But again, it's pretty tenuous because now you're in an adversarial relationship with your employer, and that leads to a whole nother bag of tricks.
Right. So looking back, let's say you were able to go back in time and to insert yourself to any point of this story, what would you have advised Dr. J how to handle what was happening in the actual moment?
Well, he should never sign anything that agrees to put him under the care, the care of criminals, you know, which is like the physician health program. And I think he should have gone back to his attorney. I think he should have delayed, and that I would not. You know, it's very dangerous when somebody forces you to do something with false urgency. Have you noticed that? A false
I've
sense
noticed
of
that several times over the last few years, how the governments and
Right.
the media have tried to keep us in panic and fear. Sure.
Do not succumb to false urgency. So I would have walked out of the room and I would have said, I need to think about this and I need to talk to a few people. That's it. What are they going to do? I would have walked out of the room. I'm not going to be pressured to sign anything. And then it would have been good if he reached out to other people who've been through this before, because you know, there are many doctors out there who've been through this and are still breathing. They could have given him some insight. So yeah, I think the isolation and falling into that false sense of urgency, signing your life away, is that was step one in his death, essentially.
There's a principle that I have that has guided me very well, especially over the last few years, and that is the best way to get me not to do something is to pressure me to do it.
Right.
I think that everybody should really think twice. When somebody's pressuring you to do something, it's not because they care about you and it's your own best interests that they have in mind, regardless of where you find yourself. If people are not giving you time to think, they're not allowing you to call a friend or a resource for more information, they're not looking out for your best interests.
And that's the example of not getting informed consent, you know, and we take an oath to give informed consent, and informed consent is required in any, you know, before you sign anything. Get out your reading glasses and read the fine print.
Right. What else could he have done differently? And I don't want to sound like I'm blaming the victim, because again, it seemed like he was trapped in some kind of a vortex at some point where he really was just didn't have any real way out. But again, this is not an isolated case. So there are other doctors, medical students who may be listening to this, or family and friends, colleagues, etc. What are some of the warning signs early on that this sort of grooming or character assassination might be going on? What can people do to notice the warning signs and to get the appropriate help?
Well, number one, I feel like physicians are really good at documenting when it comes to patient care. You know, like it's drilled into us, right? We're not good at documenting the assaults on our own humanity. So I think like when you start a job or a residency program, start documenting what your gut will tell you this doesn't feel right, or wow, what they did with this patient. You know, I had a neurosurgeon a resident tell me who quit her neurosurgery residency because she felt like she was being an accomplice to homicides, unnecessary surgeries on people. And so these are things you need to document, like document, not necessarily with the patient name, but maybe initials, because if you don't have the documentation as to the time and date these things have happened, you don't have any backup by the time the crap hits the fan, as they say. You don't have the material that you need to prove that this was a premeditated, orchestrated over multiple years, and then you end up sort of a sitting duck because you don't have, you didn't retain a lawyer early enough. You didn't get the right lawyer. You didn't document what's going on. And also, I just want to say secret recordings. I know people that were trapped in these physician health programs and they were subjected to polygraphs. Well, they did a secret recording during the polygraph and sent it to me. That's very helpful. Keep doing secret recordings. Actually, in most states, you can do one consent recordings. In the United States, there's different rules, but I personally believe, and I don't know what you believe, but if there's a crime being committed, it's imperative to do a secret recording. That's how
if
you
my
know.
life is on the line, I don't really care that much about the law. That's just my
Right.
bottom line. Or if my
Right.
life or the next person's life is on the line, I'll deal with the law afterwards.
Right. So I think, hackles up, take precautions early. When you take a job, like get the employee handbook, make sure I have all these instructions. I actually have a book called Human Rights Violation in Medicine. I would follow all the documentation guidelines in there. I would not store things in your work email. I would keep it in a separate email. I would back it up, and you just really need to document, because you can win these cases on documentation alone if you get a savvy attorney and you realize what's going on as early as possible. I think you need to recognize that your employer and the human resources department at your employer is not your friend. These gullible, idealistic humanitarians think they can complain within the system that has violated their human rights. If you were wounded by your employer or your medical education facility and you go to that same facility to help for help, that's kind of like going to your rapist's house for counseling. Why would you go get help in the place that injured you? And so I feel like we got to help these very naive youngsters and even older docs understand your employer might end up being your adversary, and document accordingly.
Yeah,
From
they're
the
not going to
get-go.
teach you this in medical school or business school, obviously.
No, they won't.
Wow. So, I mean, I could see medical students or even business students or any students listening to this and being very afraid that if they start secretly recording things or documenting things for their own protection, they might be blackballed from ever getting a job. Seems like the price that you have to pay for having a career is buying into the system and just giving up all of your human rights. Like,
Well,
how is it possible for somebody to sort of challenge his employer to start documenting things? So then fine, maybe he'll win that case, but he's going to want to move on to the next job. That's going to be on his record why he left his previous job. And the employers are not going to want to hire somebody that they know could be a troublemaker.
Well, I think you can do a lot of documentation that doesn't violate the law, like written documentation.
Right. I'm not even talking about violating the law, but the employers are going to see that as a red flag. This person is trouble.
Right.
He's doing
Well,
everything
the thing
right,
is,
but it's trouble.
I have been since, for about 10 years, helping doctors launch their own independent practices, which is how medicine is supposed to be practiced by independent people. This is the traditional model, who think independently, who are not beholden to venture capitalists buying your hospitals and private equity and all of that, firms that are taking you into profit over people. So I think doctors need to get back to, that's one thing. I wish Jay would have reached out to me. I would have helped him see how he could open his own independent practice, and he wouldn't need to be hooked up. I mean, that would be certainly better than death, and he would have a lot more ability to do a lot of innovative entrepreneurial things to help groups of children in ways that the hospitals are not very innovative. They want you to just do it one way and do it quickly and bring in max revenue. And they're just short term. They look at short term revenue. They don't look at creativity. They don't look at ethics. They don't look at long term, what's going to happen. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like doctors need to take their independence back.
And you mentioned earlier, you mentioned earlier, and I didn't know this, it's been 7 years since Dr. Neufeld passed away. Have there been any repercussions, any updates from his death?
Oh,
Has
no,
anything
no.
happened because nothing's happened?
Nothing's happened. The people that orchestrated his demise are still working in the US health system. And like I said in the article, if this were India, India and Pakistan, by the way, are the two countries that I know that have abetment to suicide laws where you will be arrested by pushing somebody into suicide. If you are named in their suicide note, you are going down to the police station within 24 hours and you might not be leaving anytime soon, which is why I just want to mention in those countries, people who die by suicide will often write in their suicide note, nobody is to blame because they don't want their family hauled down or their wife or husband in the aftermath of their death and harassed at the police station. However, if you're a physician and you've been harassed to behave in unethical ways and you name your employer or your coworker in your suicide note, they will be investigated. Unfortunately, in the US, these people just roam free for the rest of their lives and repeat the criminal behavior in another state and another hospital.
Well, how widespread is this phenomenon of doctors taking their own lives? And I also want to note that for every doctor who does end his life, there are probably tens or even hundreds that are thinking about it, that are breaking, and they just manage to hang on, but they're clearly broken people. So how widespread is this?
Well, it's very widespread. I mean, some report that we have the highest suicide rate out of any profession.
Wow.
I mean, but it's hard to know. How would we get the accurate statistics when this is all being hidden? In fact, they'll call this is an example of how ridiculous the censorship is on this, is that do you realize if a doctor dies by an overdose, overdosing on medication, they'll call it an accidental overdose. I mean, we dose drugs for a living. The title of our career is Doctor of Medicine. If you're using that drug every day on patients and you've successfully helped patients, say as an anesthesiologist, right, and you've never had a lawsuit, you can infer that they properly know how to dose the drug. So why would they improperly dose it on themselves and accidentally die by suicide? I just want to point out an accidental overdose would be like a toddler crawling through the bathroom and finding pink pills in a Tylenol bottle or something. That I would believe that that's an accidental overdose. I don't believe any doctor dies by an accidental overdose. It's either 2% intentional or 100% intentional. It's not 0% intentional, because this is your profession. So that's kind of the level of censorship. So we don't really know how many doctors are dying by suicide because the medical institutions hide it. They don't want to talk about how many of their doctors are dying. The medical schools hide it. And even the families, because of stigma, Muslim families and various other Catholic families, they just don't want to talk about it.
Right. Well, one thing that we've all personally experienced just as ordinary citizens is that when you pay a visit to the doctor, you see that increasingly they're harried, they're pressed for time, they're late for their appointments, they don't have time really to spend with you, getting to know how your whole body works and your life story and the best possible treatment plan. It's just swipe the person's card, chick-chock, get out and move on to the next person. And these may be very good, sincere people, but they're being crushed by a system that doesn't allow them to treat their patients properly. And I have a doctor in my family. He's an ER doctor, and the hours that doctors keep is insane. No human being can do that for years on end. And even if they can barely function, you want a doctor to be at their peak. And it's not possible for them to be at their physical and emotional peak when they're essentially working as slaves. And that's how the system is set up everywhere in the world.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why they're called residents, because they're supposed to sleep in the hospital and not have a life, not have a wife, not have a husband, not do anything except work. That's what you're there for, is to work for however many years, right? And then by the time you get out, maybe your childbearing years are over. You haven't had the chance to date for 10 years. It looks like you're going to go the route of being single the rest of your life. And you know what? If you do get married, your spouse isn't going to be very happy with you, because what spouse wants to stick with you if you're working the equivalent of 3 full-time jobs and you're never at home? I mean, what kind of marriage is that?
They're literally squeezing every ounce of life out of a person, and then they throw them away when they're finished. And it's not only that. I mean, people imagine that doctors make a great living, and I'm sure some of them do. There are such people in every profession, but doctors graduate from medical school with a crushing amount of debt, and into their 40s and 50s, they're still paying that off. So they're really living as slaves for the bulk of their adult lives.
Correct. That is true.
It's unbelievable. I mean, why would anybody want to become a doctor today?
Well, the parental pressure, cultural pressure, there's like a feel. Well, I mean, they don't get informed consent about what this profession requires on their way in. And I'm one of those people. Both my parents, they did recommend that I not go into medicine, but they recommended that based on economic reasons, never mental health reasons. They never told me about the PTSD and the suicide rate, okay, because that's really silenced. And you know, when you have PTSD, you don't want to go back and revisit it, and you sort of don't want to talk to your kids about it. It's nicely hidden away in a little vault in your brain that you never want to revisit, which sort of like leads to intergenerational repeating the cycle. You know, if the people who got PTSD from this profession 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago aren't addressing it, you're just only allowing it to increase, especially when third parties swoop in and want to increase profit over people and make things even more tumultuous than they were when there was still a doctor's lounge. When my parents went to medical school, there was at least more free time to talk to other doctors and have these, you know, more relaxed visits with patients. So, yeah.
This podcast started several years ago during the COVID era. It was called Medical War Crimes, and we eventually branched out to larger subjects. It's now called Amalek and Erev. But for a long time, we were focusing strictly on medical war crimes. And I was under the impression that the doctors were perpetrators of the crimes and the regular citizens were the victims. Of course, there were good doctors out there, but it seems that even the average doctor, to a large extent, is really a victim himself of the system of being groomed to be a callous, uncaring, unfeeling person who's just doing his job, going about his duties. And that's what the system sort of forces decent people to be, except for the rare exceptions like you that are able to sort of break out of that system and go off on your own path. Most people are not really capable of doing that. They're certainly not trained to be able to do that. And they become sort of these soulless monsters. The doctors themselves seem to be victims.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, in my medical school, which was hooked up to I went to medical school in Texas, and I realized only later the reason why my tuition was so low is that they had a contract with the Texas Department of Justice. I was never told on the way in that 30% of my patients would be prisoners that would come in shackles, okay, that I would be working on death row. Can you imagine me, idealistic me, 23 years old, just working on death row? I mean, how are you? Boy, is that an oxymoron? I'm in there trying to help somebody be healthy, but they're going to get executed. How weird is that? And so the thing is, if you're trained on prisoners, okay, and also you accept the idea that some of your patients are going to be executed, I mean, what does that do to your mind as a young person? Also, I have a big problem with the vivisection, and we're going to just murder dogs as first-year medical students, do all sorts of heinous crimes on animals. You know, man's best friend. Let me tell you, if you're able as a first-year medical student to give a heart attack to a dog, then it's a desensitization program. This isn't about, you know, opening their heart, checking for heartworms. I mean, this has nothing to do with human health. You know, I think the Nazis did this as well. Their soldiers had to train with their German shepherds, and then at a certain point kill them. You know, they want you to be able to kill your best friend. You know, that shows that you're ready to go. And so this is a heartless, soulless training regimen that I have watched my colleagues go through, and then they graduate medical school. You know, we have to write a personal statement on the way into residency. You know how many people in my class asked me to write their personal statements for them? That might be a ding, 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 ding clue. You don't know who you are anymore. You can't write your personal statement. They actually successfully dehumanized you right in front of my eyes. It's just terrifying.
When people study the Holocaust or they talk about it, they tend to think of the gas chambers, the ovens, the aftermath. But the Holocaust didn't start with ordinary citizens becoming, you know, Nazis and throwing people into ovens and mass graves. It started many years earlier, where the citizens were groomed to be desensitized to the horrors of doing these things to people, to dehumanizing other people. That was a national grooming process. And what you've just outlined is basically the same thing, where you're grooming good, decent, sometimes wonderful people, turning them slowly into monsters. I didn't know that doctors are basically forced to murder a dog. Is this all doctors? I mean, how widespread is that? Is that something every doctor must do?
I think this only stopped maybe in the early 2000s. I went to medical school I finished in 1993. And up until then, you know, like pretty much all medical students were murdering dogs. These are people's prior pets that they get from like Class B dealers. Can you imagine you going to the it's the Humane Society. Somehow you're picking up these pets. And I mean, what does it do to the heart and soul of a young person who's like in their early 20s to like give a heart attack to a dog, to watch its EKG flatline, to slice? I mean, I still have the instructions. I basically, I protested this, and I was like the only one in my school that I was ready to quit medical school over this. I went to visit my, the dean wanted to see me, and he diagnosed me with Bambi syndrome, you know, because kind of belittling me for having a heart and soul and caring about animals. You know what? If you don't care about vulnerable animals and human beings, and you can kill prisoners and pets, you're really exactly what they're looking for. Keep going. They want you to get going with all these pharmaceuticals that are untested, and, you know, let's put everyone on everything and don't give informed consent. You're perfect. That's what they're looking for. Somebody who's left their
psychopaths, basically.
Yeah, somebody who's left their conscience at the front door. Come on in.
You know, I'm old enough to remember when the job of a doctor was actually to make people healthier and to save people's lives, and not to be trained on how to make people sick and end their lives. I mean, that's exactly what they do. And made this medical assistance in dying. Doctors are literally taught how to kill people. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So based on your experience and your work over the years, like, how do we get out of this just as a society? Obviously, the system is not going to fix itself. They're all lawyered up. They have the corporate bribery. Everything is set up to protect them and keep the system churning. How do we as ordinary citizens start to get out of this?
As ordinary citizens, well, I think selecting the doctors who are in independent practice, and just like you would boycott a corporation that's harming people, go to support the doctors, even if you have to pay on your own for the care. Financially and as a patient, support the doctors that are doing things the right way, because doctors are afraid to leave the system because they think that the patients won't follow them, because they'd rather pay like a $10 copay or get free care in a big system than actually go out on the limb with the doctor who wants to do the right thing. So I think patients, number one, they need to start supporting doctors who are doing this the right way. And I think patients need to start asking their doctors, like, how are you doing? You seem rushed. You know, point out that this is a problem, because, you know, sometimes, you know, the frog in the boiling water, you don't realize what's going on until somebody points it out. You know, like, your hair's turned all gray in the last year. You look like you're stressed out. Are you okay? Like your demeanor's changed significantly since I started to see you a year ago. Like, just maybe plant the seeds that, like, this isn't normal. I even had patients who've told doctors, you know what, you look very unhappy working here, and I just want you to know I really love having you as my doctor, and I would support you and follow you if you opened your own practice. You know, like, just hearing things like that. We need to come together as allies. I think the one thing we don't need to do is fuel the adversarial nature. You know, they're setting us up, you know, divide and conquer. Let's have the patients and the doctors at each other's throats, and the doctors and nurse practitioners at each, you know, as long as they can create this false adversarial environment among people who are truly allies at baseline, they continue having us fight with each other while they just run to the bank and control the world, right? So I think we need to come together, and I think it really helps for patients to be able to listen to this conversation and realize, you know, these doctors started out as teenagers going pre-med to really help you. You know, they put their whole life on hold, even their own childbearing, because why? They want to, at their core, help you. And so have some compassion if they're looking like they're not able to do it. Maybe help them get back to their original goal. I think that a really good thing for everyone to do is maybe ask physicians, and physicians ask themselves, hey, why did I go into this? What was my original dream? Everyone needs to get back to their original dream, because that's what tethers you to your soul. You know, if you don't have a dream, why go through the motions of being alive? It's just, why do the laundry, you know, all the things, you got to change your tires on the car, you got to, you know, like, life becomes a burden if you're detached and untethered from your soul. And the only thing that keeps you connected to your soul is your dream and life's purpose. I think we all need to help remind each other why we're here, like the high integrity reasons.
Absolutely. You know, several years ago, my father had what they call a mini stroke. I don't know if there is such a thing. Thank God he's fine. but he had to go to the ER in one of the hospitals in Israel. He was languishing there for 9 hours. This is an elderly man with a medical history who had just had a stroke, and we didn't know what the situation was. And he was languishing there in the ER, and he was not the only one. It was just people were moaning and crying, and nobody was giving him the time of day for 9 hours. And he was getting very upset. He wanted to go home. We couldn't send him home. And I kept on going to the office, to the reception, saying, what's going on? We need to find him a bed. We need to get him some treatment. Somebody's got to look at him and do something. And they were very, very callous. And I was talking to them. Ultimately, I threatened the hospital. I said, there's a bunch of names on the wall of all your rich donors. If anything happens to my father, I'm going to hold you all personally responsible. And I'm going to make sure every one of these people knows what happened here. They very quickly found my father a bed. But it shouldn't have to come to that. And one of the, I was talking with people about this afterwards. Some said, well, you know, they've been doing this for years and years and years. They can't care about everybody. They're overwhelmed. I said, look, if you've reached a point where you cannot care about human beings that are suffering, that may be dying, it's time for you to take a break or find a different job. You know, you cannot continue to do this if you're not able to care about these people.
Right. Correct. You took an oath. You took an oath to care, and not only to care about the patients, but to care about each other as brothers and sisters in medicine. If you're retaliating against your peers instead of having compassion for them, then you're part of the problem.
A final question, then I also want to encourage our audience. I see that there's questions and comments here, which we'll get to soon. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box now. Also, both for the live audience and those listening to the recording, I'm going to put up links to the articles about Dr. J, Dr. Wible's website, all the good stuff that we've been talking about. But one final question that I have is there a sense of shame among doctors to admit that they're buckling under the stress, the pressure, the hours that they have to work? Kind of like a soldier in the army. That's like this macho attitude that he can go on two hours of sleep and he's like the superhero. Do they have a sense of shame to admit, I can't handle this? It's overwhelming. It's breaking me.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings to mind the physician that I know who died by suicide in Israel. He was like top of his game. I think he had 3 daughters. They were about to go on a trip to, I don't know, Spain or somewhere. And then he just literally like walked out of the garage, went to the field next door and shot himself in the head. And yeah, he was ashamed probably to admit that he was struggling. And I think one of the reasons he was struggling, just in his case, is he had to receive some, which I think might be common in Israel. You receive some young dead people through the IDF or whatever, the army, right? Everyone has to serve in, and so you might have to tell a family your young family member, prized family member, is dead. And even though this person, by the way, arrived dead to the hospital, he held himself accountable for not saving this person and had to go through the visceral torment of telling the family, you know, your young adult child is dead, right? And so, and then there's no support. Like, he didn't have any debriefing or counseling. You know what that does to you, to have to, do you know, if you have to tell somebody their loved one is dead and you hear the shrieks and the scream and the mother's fainting in the hallway, and, you know, the whole reaction a family would have, and you're witnessing that, and it's going into your body. So you're going to have PTSD about that, right? And then plus doctors have this feeling that they need to be perfect and save everyone. You know, his brother's a doctor currently still practicing in Israel. And he told me, I just was horrified when he told me this, that at one point, I think he made a minor medication error. The patient survived, whatever, but he held himself to such a perfectionistic standard that he said he took the chart home, or a copy of the chart home, and he sleeps with it like next to his pillow or next to his, just to remind himself that, you know, you're not as smart as you think you are. You know, that's like an impossible standard. If you're berating yourself for being a human and making an error when you're working this number of hours, these people are completely ashamed and have nobody to go to with their very human vulnerabilities. And so, you know, and men too, right? Are men going to want to start crying and calling somebody for help? Or are they just going to grab a gun, especially in a country where you might have access to a lot of guns? You know, it's easier to grab a gun than to admit that, like, I need to cry, right? Is it sometimes easier to do that? Probably.
We have a question from one of our audience members. Question for Dr. Wible. Do you fear for your own license and well-being by exposing the corruption within the medical system in Oregon?
Oh, not at all, especially because I retired my license. But hey, I've been doing this for 12 years. and I've been fearless in my approach to this. I am more fearless now without my medical license, and I feel like I'm more effective. Do you know how much more effective you can be without any fear of censorship? You know, there's a lot of doctors, even though I run a suicide helpline, that have like reported me as a hazard to the medical profession, you know, just because they're ego bruised and jealous that like I'm doing this, right? And other doctors will come to my, you know, protection, and they'll say, well, what are you doing? Are you leading a free suicide helpline? When you're staying up all night leading a free suicide helpline, maybe you can talk. Until then, you know, be quiet. Like, you know, that quote, get out of the way of the people who are actually doing things, you know? So yeah, there's this ego bruising sort of jealousy thing going on, which is really what threw Dr. J under the bus. But you know, no, I'm not somebody. I think when I stay in integrity with God and my life's purpose, I have nothing to fear. I am not a fearful person.
Amen to that. I followed a very similar course in life. I'm not involved in any organizations, affiliations. I am a rabbi, but I do my own thing. And I've always wanted to do my own thing because then you're free. You don't have to be tied to the corrupt people who don't have the best interests of people at heart, for sure. Okay, we have another question for you. You've extensively researched PHP practices, which you're going to think of physician health practices. Is that what PHP stands for?
Physician health programs, yes.
Program. Okay, so based on your research and interactions with physicians, how do you respond to critics who argue that PHPs are necessary for patient safety, which I'm sure to a certain extent they are, or that's the sales pitch. So what alternatives do you propose?
Well, what I'm proposing is that we follow the federal law in the United States, which allows people due process, second opinions. Can you imagine going to a doctor and you just don't hit it off, but you have no way to leave? Like you've now signed for a 5-year commitment with a doctor. That's like you can't get a second opinion. I mean, the polygraph testing, that's ridiculous. We don't do that to patients.
And they
Okay.
don't even work polygraph tests most of the
Yeah,
time.
I mean, they're not even allowed. Yeah. So basically what we need is to allow physicians to get the same help that everyone else in the United States gets with legal protection called the Americans with Disabilities Act, which prevents you from financial and emotional extortion and discipline and punishment when you seek health care. So essentially we need to just remove the criminal element from this and allow physicians to get the very good care that they know that they deserve when they ask for help.
And also, speaking of going to these psych wards, I mean, I see a psych ward as basically a prison where your sentence is determined by the wardens of the prison.
Often, yes. Yeah, they're following like a cookbook algorithm, and there's no individual case analysis sometimes, which means that you're just, for whatever you're suffering from, you're in a room with other people suffering from all different things. And they sort of let the patients, you know, basically do therapy on each other, you know, and then they charge them for it. Right? Because they don't have proper facilitation or even a knowledgeable, I mean, PHPs are like bureaucrats practicing medicine without a license, essentially.
Unbelievable. I see one other question here, then a bunch of comments. If any comments you want to address, please feel free. Have you noticed an increase in doctors setting themselves up independently in the US, and are patients following them?
Yes, definitely. There's something called direct primary care, which is, you know, cash pay, where you have a direct relationship with the doctor versus going through a government or commercial insurance. You know, when you pay for your own care, you can be sure that you're getting somebody who's truly there for you. If you have a middleman in between you and the doctor that has dictates, you're not really having a direct relationship with your doctor. You're both succumbing to a third party's view of what should be happening during your appointment. It would be like being married and then having a third party in your bedroom dictating what you can and can't do when you're alone with your spouse. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay, please let us know how we can find out about your work, websites, books, etc. And any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience.
So idealmedicalcare.org and PamelaWible.com. I mean, if you look up Dr. Suicide Helpline, Dr. Wible, I mean, you're going to find 11 years of a very dense material that I've produced online, and TED Talks and a Wikipedia page and all of that. I mean, you'll find all these things. And by the way, because I run a suicide helpline, I returned phone calls right away when people are suffering, including, you know, this is an international suicide helpline I've been running for 12 years. And I talk to doctors in New Zealand and Australia and Israel. And, you know, so feel free to reach out. I'm just email away.
Yeah, are you the only person doing all the suicide hotlines? Do you have any colleagues working with you, or any possibility of people joining you in your effort to just lighten your own workload?
Well, I have a Dr. Suicide Dream Team that meets every Sunday with about 200 plus doctors in there who all want to help. And the way that I am helping them help is I'm sharing the wisdom that I've learned from 12 years of running the suicide helpline and the things that actually prevent the suicide from thousands of hours of listening to suicidal doctors. And by the way, they admit things to me that they would never admit to their own psychiatrist, because the psychiatrist is typing it in the medical record that could come back and bite them in the butt. And so what I want to say is this is really a condition of untethering from the soul. And the sooner we can get retethered to our souls, like dancing around the perimeter, just trying to remove guns and lethal means. You know, somebody wants to die by suicide. If you take away their gun, they're going to get a knife. If you take away their knife, they're going to go to a tall building. If they can't find a tall building, they're going to walk into the ocean. You know, the thing is, they're always going to find a way. So let's just get to the primary, kind of like cancer. We could dance all around dealing with the metastases, but why don't we get to the primary location of the cancer and actually deal with the problem, which this is a soul problem. Physicians have lost connections with their soul. And the way to reestablish that is get them reconnected with their dreams, and then they won't be looking for guns, pills, oceans, tall buildings, and everything else.
Right. They're dealing with the symptom and not the actual problem.
Right.
So I see a question from me, Rabbi Weissman. How can religious leaders like yourself, I don't know if I'm a leader, but okay, contribute to raising public awareness about the mental health challenges faced by physicians and advocate for better support in alignment with Dr. Wible's efforts? Well, that's what this podcast is intended to do, and follow-up emails and any other collaboration that we may have in the future. That's what we're trying to do. I'm, using whatever little platform I have to try to springboard more people to find out about it, to get excited about it, and hopefully to do something about it, to turn words into actions. Can a person get sectioned or maybe sanctioned, you mean to say, in the US when they admit that they are suicidal? That's an important question, especially with somebody who's working as a doctor. If he confides in somebody that he's suicidal, can that come back to bite him?
Yeah, absolutely. They could be sent to a physician health program or reported to the medical board. But I do want to say, with regard to physicians, their work ethic is so high that that's the last skill set that leaves. They'll lose their marriage. They'll be estranged from their children. They'll lose everything before they lose their work ethic. So they're really kind of like doing relatively well amid their suicidal thoughts as it in regard to patients. You know, the patients have told me that, well, I tried to go to a follow-up for my physician, but he killed himself after my knee surgery or hip surgery or brain surgery. You know, they had a successful surgery and then the doctor went in the next room and hung himself. So I just assume all doctors are suffering, and probably most have had suicidal ideation. And we need to look at this as a systems problem and not an individual problem. These individuals are having the normal reaction anyone would have to a very sick criminal medical education and practice environment.
So being that you mentioned it's criminal, so this segues into the other question I see here. Are there legal actions we can take to hold the medical boards and administrative staff at hospitals accountable? You mentioned in India, there are such legal recourses in place. Is there anything in the US that people can do when they find out about these things?
Well, I think there are a number of physicians who are resourced enough financially and emotionally that they have won payouts when they go up against their hospital and other organizations. But again, they have to document everything and have their heads screwed on really straight from the beginning, and have to really understand they're on a chessboard with criminals as soon as possible so that they can put their case together, and they have to get the right attorney. So I think, yes, of course, naivete will not save you. You have to get savvy to the medical legal terrain you're in as a physician from day one of medical school.
Wow. Okay, I don't see any further questions. Any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with? And then I'll turn it back to Lowell. And I just want to thank you very much for the work that you're doing. It's really incredible. I did not know so much of what you were talking about. New words I've learned, like suicidologist. I never knew there was such a thing. You know, really changed my perspective on suicide in general. There's just a lot of stuff going on, so many layers to the problems in the medical system. And this is a new layer that is really serious that I was not at all aware of. And if anything good comes out of Dr. J's passing, hopefully it's this. I hope that there's justice, that there's a God in the world. We can't always bring justice in this world, although we try, but there's a God, and all the people who did this to him and caused him to take his own life are going to get what's coming to them. And if we can play a small role in making that happen sooner, I would be honored. to play a role in that. And hopefully we'll be able to put a stop to this. The only way things are going to end are when we decide that we've had enough and we're going to do something about it. All in our own way, can do something. You've, of course, dedicated your life to doing something. I'm using my platform today to do something. People have to, everybody in their own way needs to decide there's something that I can do to make this problem a little bit better. And then eventually they'll reach a critical mass where there's a massive, massive change. We can't just wait for God to do everything, but he is going to assist us if we're doing our jobs.
100% agree. One other word that I think is really important for people to understand, especially if you're interested in war crimes in the medical field, is the term psychological autopsy, which essentially is, an autopsy means seeing with your own eyes and, cutting open a body and trying to figure out like why it died. I'm not suggesting we all start doing that, but there is a psychology behind war crimes. And there's a psychology, a state of mind that Dr. Jay Neufeld had that allowed him to take that final fatal step. And I think it is our requirement as human beings, especially as physicians, to research unexpected deaths and get to the bottom of why every single person suddenly dies unexpectedly, in the middle of the prime of their career as a 20-year-old sudden death. We cannot walk away from sudden deaths without exploration. It's our job. And or we're just sitting there waiting for more sudden deaths, right? And so to walk away from Dr. Jay Neufeld and not investigate, the thing that I published would be essentially a psychological autopsy of the state of mind and what happened that led to his death so that we can take action. If I had not produced this, I would never meet you. I wouldn't have been here on this podcast. We wouldn't be talking about him. And it is my goal, by the way, for Dr. Jay's last dying wish to come true. And his dying wish is that he doesn't want any other doctors to die by suicide. And that is my life's mission.
Amen to that. I see one other question that just came in, and then we'll give it back to Lowell. Are there ways to access to educating students going into the medical field? Like, how can we reach medical students, these fresh youngsters, idealistic, but are being poisoned by the system? How can we reach them and give them these very important messages?
Well, if you're in medicine or you're retired or you work or you have any free time, please go mentor these young med students. They need actual, real kind of motherly, fatherly mentorship from the older generation. So I think it's a real disservice when we go into self-preservation mode and we don't nurture our young people. Our young people need the wisdom of those of us who have been in this field longer. And it is our job, again, it's part of the Hippocratic Oath, it is our job to nurture young people. We cannot walk away and allow them to succumb to third-party inducements and criminality. And that's what happens if we don't do our job. Can you imagine having a child and then walking away and not nurturing that child? You made a commitment for 18 plus years. You had a child. It is our job, especially in the medical profession, to take care of medical students. And if we're not doing that, we are going to have to answer to that, to God, to ourselves. That's a karmic problem right there. And then, these are people that are going to be the future doctors taking care of you when you need help, when you're in, if anything, do it for your own self-preservation. What kind of doctor are you going to have if you let them all slide off the edge of the earth into criminality? We're all in this together. Let's nurture one another. And if you don't have time to do it, send them to me. And if you want to know how you can help, contact me. I have a million ideas. Doesn't take much time.
Okay, I encourage everybody to look up Dr. Wible. I've added links to the chat over here. I'll put them on the description of the recording. And now I will turn it back to Lowell for any final thoughts.
We want to thank Dr. Wible for joining Rabbi Weissman for this program. We are broadcasting from Jerusalem. And I have some thoughts. In fact, here's who they're from. That's Lieutenant Colonel Martin Gallen, Esquire, my father, buried with full military honors by United States Military Honor Guard in the Hudson Highlands of Westchester, New York on October 16, 2018. Three things. One, he said, it's forbidden to obey or give illegal orders. So then the question is, who determines what's illegal? That's the $50,000 question. if one doesn't have a concept of a lawgiver, an eternal moral law, then anything's legal, whatever you're told in Maoist China or Stalinist Russia, or not Hitler's Germany, or right here. But it's forbidden to give or obey illegal orders. Second point, he graduated NYU Law Review in 1949 and did set up his own practice in the South Bronx of New York in 1952. Most people don't know how to establish our own small farms and businesses, periods. That's why it's very easy. You get out of medical school, law school, you go to a nice cushy job, you get a salary and benefits until your firm loses one of its big clients or accounts, and then the young guys are out and they don't know what to do. So yes, it's in the short run, it's difficult. In the long run, it's great. Many people simply are not suited to establish their own small farms and businesses. And by the way, in 1900, most Americans owned their own small farms and businesses, not like today. Hopefully that's going to change. The third point is about the people who gave you a hard time. David Ogilvy, who no one here would have heard of, and I don't expect you to, was he lived till about 100 and died a generation or so ago. Came from Scotland to America, a real American immigrant success story. He did come from a very wealthy family, but he decided he wants to do everything on his own. Down and out in Paris and London, went and worked in kitchens all over Europe, went to America and established from nothing his own Ogilvy and Mather public relations advertising firm. He wrote several books. He was, what is very rare today, a real Renaissance man with a real general education. He was lethally funny, and he had the very lethal British and Scottish sense of satire and humor. And he said in one of his books, and this directly relates to Dr. Wible, it's often said that mediocre men being generic, do not recognize exceptional men. He said, David Ogilvy, disagree. Mediocre men recognize exceptional men, resent them, and seek to destroy them. Look at Dr. Zelenko. Look at you. Rabbi Weissman has also had that experience. Jealousy, envy, rage, insecurity, all the works. So that would account for a lot of the problems that you're having. Those would be my last comments. I do have something I want to say, but in the non-recorded section after we're done recording. Let me see, Hanani, are there any other?
No, I think we're still all right. Why don't we wrap up the recorded part and then we'll get to the
Right. Thank you very much. Shalom from Eugene, Oregon, and Jerusalem, and many places in the United States, and England, and Japan, and France. Shalom from Jerusalem. Shabbat Shalom, because it's already Thursday. And this was our June Erev Rav and Amalek Research Fellowship seminar. We will reconvene in a few weeks for July.